Hi, I'm back for the third time. so, yeah, so we have another panel session. Sorry, a fireside chat with no other than Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and the co-chair of the independent panel for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Helen, please come on stage. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Helen has been in all of mostly of the panels I've been to, in side events at the UN and outside. So I feel like I've been talking to her for for most of the week. Um, so yesterday was the high level meeting on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Helen was, of course, in the middle, you know, giving her powerful statements. But you set a pretty scary scenario there at the, before heads of state and government when you said, what if? What if there's a new dangerous virus now that's circulating and infect us? And we all go back to our home countries and spread this to our communities. Would the world be ready to manage that outbreak? If you were to answer your question, what would be your response?
Well, firstly, nothing's changed about the international legal regime around this. We don't have a pandemic accord. We have the same international health regulations. We don't yet have any kind of surge funding mechanism to scale up to the degree required, and the lack of ready access to finance quickly was a problem with COVID-19. Add to that the pandemic has left many countries, if not most countries, pretty stripped out fiscally. There's a lot more debt, really huge levels of debt from high income to the lowest income countries. I suppose the only respect in which we might be a little better off is the experience of COVID is so recent that we may still have some of the mechanisms and tools ready at hand to deploy. But I think funding would be a significant issue, and the same issues that bedeviled WHO and trying to get access to the site of outbreak, which it doesn't have the power to insist on, the right to publish information it has without government permission, the ability to act in a precautionary fashion, the taking advice from an emergency committee which may see things differently, all the things that were obstacles and led to a month's delay in really getting any action, they're still there.
For those of you who are not in the room, who didn't follow, it's a whole day event. Why was the meeting, this high level meeting, so important? Maybe can give the audience a point on that, and why was the declaration so disappointing for so many?
Well, firstly, the meeting was really almost 2 years too late. We recommended in the independent panel report of May 2021 that it be held by the end of the year. And imagine if it had been held by the end of 2021 when, we were still, very much aware of the pandemic, where governments hadn't entirely moved on from it. I think it would have had a much bigger impact, and we may have got a better declaration out of it. But at this point, we're well into the cycle of panic and neglect. So we went through the panic in 2020. It started to abate somewhat in 2021 as the vaccines rolled out in the high-income countries, and of course, as we know, dismally for low and middle-income countries. But coming as it did now, so many governments have moved on, and we're in what's, a syndemic or a polycrisis or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of things commanding governments and diplomats' attention. So this probably hasn't had the degree of application that it should have had. So we ended up with what is clearly a weak political declaration, which still has to go through the General Assembly, by the way. And I think those well informed about this will know that on the eve of the high-level meetings, a letter was received from a group of countries who have gathered together as a group opposed to unilateral coercive measures. They don't like any of it at all. They don't like the process, and there's still, at least in theory, the ability to unpick declarations a bit when it goes to the General Assembly. But the only concrete commitment in the political declaration is the commitment to hold another meeting in 3 years' time and to discuss what's happened in the intervening 3 years. Well, what are we going to discuss? What are we going to measure? I mean,
what concerns you about that timeline? We're going to have to meet again in 3 years' time.
3 years' time. I mean, and will we have improved IHR? Will we have a new legal instrument around pandemics? Who knows? I mean, the sense of urgency has gone. I sometimes draw the parallel with what happened after the Chernobyl nuclear explosion, which was devastating. And within 5 months of Chernobyl, during the Cold War, we're in a new one now, but that's another matter. During the old Cold War, within 5 months, the member states negotiated 2 new nuclear safety conventions. Well, here we are, maybe next year, May 2024, at the World Health Assembly, 4 years after the declaration of a public health emergency of international concern, and a pandemic which, is estimated to have been associated with excess mortality of 24 million people, let alone the social and economic costs that are associated with it. Where's the sense of urgency? This is not 5 months. It may be 4 years. It may go longer. Old saying applies: those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, which is why we say, if there was another pandemic emerging tomorrow, would we be better off, better prepared?
You mentioned about urgency, and yesterday there were some heads of state who were there at the plenary making, statements, but it's not as many as one would expect for a high-level event. I think there was less than 15. There was 13 heads of state who spoke. How are you viewing that? When we talk about urgency and pandemic preparedness should be at the top of the agenda.
I think if the meeting had been 2 years ago, it would have been a different story. But they've kind of moved on from the urgency of the moment. I do think it's an issue overall that there were a number of very significant no-shows at the General Assembly this year. I think it was David McNair of the One campaign who said that the General Assembly is looking like Davos with lower level attendance. Well, it's pretty devastating, isn't it? But I mean, what is it when you have a Security Council with 5 permanent members and the heads of state of 4 of them don't come, right? I mean, doesn't it go with being a member of the Security Council, you front up to the organisation? I think it's disgraceful. So a lot of room for reflection here on the UN platforms and how seriously they're being taken, and to have come through an existential crisis like the pandemic and have so little level of interest from heads of state is, of course, reprehensible.
Well, everyone's now looking at the pandemic treaty as the next opportunity. What can be done to avoid the disappointments that emerged from this week's meeting?
So this week's meeting, if it, sort of tossed the ball to Geneva, would have achieved something. Are the negotiators in Geneva going to feel that they're under, any more pressure to achieve something than they do currently? I mean, clearly they're bogged down on quite fundamental issues. And it's not yet clear to me that they can present outcomes in May next year.
What happens if that doesn't happen?
So
what's the plan C?
Well, I mean, I think there could be a plan C, but I mean, there is a debate among countries now as to whether they will accept a weak agreement or would be better with no agreement. So that's the sort of brinksmanship, I suppose. I do wonder whether there might be a plan C in going back to the concept of a framework convention, which doesn't try to spell everything out in detail at this point, which is very difficult, obviously, as we come up to the seventh round of the INB. When we did the independent panel report, we recommended the negotiation of a framework convention under the relevant article of the WHO Constitution. There's only ever been one of these, and that was the Tobacco Convention, but they can be built on over time. So a framework convention can establish broad principles, and that they're not so difficult to agree on, and then over time you try to work to improve with protocols and so on. That could be a plan C that could come out again.
You've been calling for world leaders, to take bold action for years now. It's been more than 2 years since the launch of the report of the independent panel. What keeps you going? What motivates you?
Well, life is short, isn't it? And the issues are really serious. So, we just have to keep up a level of commitment and energy, because if we walk away and don't hold people to account for making agreements and pushing forward, we'll never get any progress. And I think a lot rests on strong civil society advocacy to keep governments under some pressure to do something. If we give up on that and go away and do other things, then we can't expect much progress. So I can only encourage those in the room, and I'm sure very big civil society presence here, don't give up. We have to try and make these systems work, because the alternative is a bit daunting.
Well, don't give up and keep going. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Helen.